The wind howled through cracks in the chapel walls, shaking the old wooden shutters and sending a gust across the altar, snuffing out 2 of the candles. The flame flickered, then vanished, as if it too had lost faith in the day. Julia May Callahan stood alone in her yellow gingham dress, trembling hands clutched tight around a dry bouquet of prairie daisies. She had stitched that dress herself, every hem sewn with borrowed hope. But no amount of thread could hold together a heart unraveling in front of a watching town. She could feel their eyes, every single one of them, judgmental, curious, cold. They filled the pews like ghosts in Sunday best. Whispers floated behind gloved hands. A child cried in the back, but even that couldn't soften the silence stretching between Julia and the altar. The pastor looked down at her, then out the open chapel doors, then back at her again. His throat bobbed, his hands folded. "Should he proceed without the groom?" he asked gently, his voice like cracked glass. Julia didn't answer. She stared straight ahead, chin held high even as her knees threatened to betray her. Her fiancé, Samuel Dalton, the respected, God-fearing rancher's son, was late. 10 minutes late, then 20, then 30. Her heart had stopped measuring time and had started counting disappointments instead. The first came with a letter, short, stiff, and full of polite promises. The second with the handshake of his father, who looked at her belly longer than her face. The third came now, as the chapel doors remained open to a winter wind and an empty road. A shrill voice pierced attention. "She's not even decent." It came from Mabel Greeley, widow of a preacher and lifetime member of the town's Moral Purity League. Her lace hat wobbled as she pointed. "You all know what's hiding under that dress, and no wedding can whitewash sin." There was a low murmur of agreement. Someone spat. A man's voice said, "He did right by not showing. Ain't his burden to carry." Julia's hands tightened around the bouquet until stems snapped. Her jaw ached from holding back tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not even her voice had stayed. "Folks," the pastor tried again, helpless, shifting awkwardly. "We may not know the full circumstances, and it's not for us to—" She lied. Another voice cut in, this time from Samuel's father, arms crossed, face hard. "Told my boy she was clean. Then we hear word from Georgia. She was already with child before she stepped off the coach." "Is it true?" a woman gasped. Julia said nothing, but her silence screamed. The baby stirred inside her, a flutter against her ribs. A child who hadn't asked for shame. A child whose only crime was being carried by a woman trying to start again. Her cheeks burned. Her shoulders sagged. Then came the sound. Boots. Heavy ones. Each step echoed louder than the last as a figure emerged from the shadows beyond the chapel doors. The man stood tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back and snow crusted on his coat. His dark hair was tied back, jaw unshaven, and eyes like 2 wolves who'd seen too much. Garrett Wade. No one in town had seen him in 3 years. Not since his brother disappeared. Not since he walked away from a deputy's badge and into the unknown. Rumors swirled he'd gone bounty hunting. Others claimed he'd taken to the bottle or buried himself in border towns. Whatever the truth, it now stood at the threshold, breathing heavy and staring straight at Julia. He took off his hat. "Pastor," he said, "I reckon I've got something to say." The room held its breath. He walked to the front, each step slow, deliberate. He didn't look at the crowd, only at Julia. And when he stopped, a few feet from her trembling form, he said something no one expected. "That child in her belly, it's mine." The air was sucked out of the room. What did he say? Mabel gasped. Garrett raised his voice. "I said that child is mine, not Samuel's, not hers to be shamed for. Mine." Julia's knees buckled slightly. She reached out for the altar rail and caught herself, her lips parted, breath shallow. Garrett didn't blink. "And before you all start throwing stones," he continued, looking around now, sweeping the crowd with a cold, hardened gaze, "you ought to know I ain't here to make excuses. I'm here to make it right." Samuel's father started to protest, but Garrett turned his full attention toward him. "Your son never planned to marry her. He was stringing her along, making a fool of her. all while sending letters back east. Letters with someone else's name on 'em. I got one in my saddlebag if you'd like to read it. There were gasps. Julia stared at Garrett, heart pounding. Her lips trembled. She hadn't known. She had assumed that Samuel had changed his mind, that the shame of her condition had driven him away, not that he'd never planned to be there in the first place, not that he'd lied from the beginning. The pastor finally cleared his throat. "Is this true, Julia?" She could only nod. She started, voice hoarse. "I didn't know." Garrett's voice softened. "She ain't a liar. She's just been used. And I aim to fix that." Silence stretched again, but this time it was weighted with something new. Confusion. Shame. Realization. Mabel sat down. Others looked away. Only the wind dared speak. Julia found her voice again, quiet but steady. "Why now?" she asked him. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Because it's the right thing. And because I couldn't let you stand here alone." "You think this makes us even?" she asked. "No," he said. "I think it makes us honest." She looked into his eyes, searching for anything familiar. There was no romance there, no false sweetness. But there was something better. Respect. The pastor stepped back from the altar. Do you want to continue with the ceremony?" Garrett glanced at Julia. She raised her chin again, strength returning. "No," she said clearly. "There ain't gonna be no ceremony today." A few murmurs rose. Julia turned to face the pews, her voice louder now, steadier. "You all watched me get dragged through dirt, and none of you asked a single question. None of you wondered why a girl like me rode all the way from Georgia with nothing but a letter and a baby in her belly. You just assumed. You always do." She turned back to Garrett. "You may not be the father, but you told the truth when no one else would. That counts for something." Then she turned toward the chapel doors. "But I ain't staying here." "Where will you go?" the pastor asked. She paused. "Somewhere that don't smell like hypocrisy." Garrett hesitated, then followed her outside. Snow was falling. Cold bit through their coats. The wind tugged at her hair. He reached for the reins of his horse and handed her the second pair. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well." "I'll teach you." They mounted together. The church behind them didn't cheer. It didn't applaud. But as they rode out past the edge of town, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the start of something more honest than a promise at an altar. And for the first time in a long time, Julia May Callahan didn't feel ashamed. She felt free. And the West, with all its cold, empty miles, suddenly felt a little more open. The fire crackled low beneath a sky powdered with stars. Julia sat wrapped in her threadbare shawl, knees drawn close to her chest, eyes fixed on the embers as if they might whisper answers she hadn't found yet. The baby stirred inside her again, restless, like the mother carrying it. Her breath puffed out in little clouds that dissolved in the cold mountain air. Across from her, Garrett Wade poured black coffee from a dented tin pot into a dented tin cup. Everything about him looked dented, even his soul. They hadn't spoken much since leaving town, just enough to trade directions and decide when to stop. But the silence between them was never empty. It was heavy. It throbbed. Garrett offered her the cup without a word. She took it, cradling it for warmth more than thirst. Still, she drank. The taste was bitter, but somehow honest. "You meant what you said back there?" she asked finally, voice low. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the fire. "Every word." "You're not the father." "No, but you told him it was yours." "I did." "Why?" He finally looked at her then, and his voice was as flat and dusty as his boots. "Because somebody had to." Julia's mouth pulled into a humorless smile. "Chivalry died a long time ago, mister." "Didn't say I was a gentleman," he replied. "Just didn't like watching a girl hang for someone else's crimes." She turned her eyes back to the fire. "It wasn't just a baby. I was promised a new life, a fresh start. That altar was the last thing I believed in." Garrett didn't respond right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, crumpled letter, creased and stained from too many read-throughs. "This," he said, offering it. was written by my brother. Julia didn't take it. Your brother? Thomas Wade, former deputy. Last known for running away from responsibility and leaving ashes behind. She hesitated, then slowly took the letter. Her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, the honey-slick promises. Her stomach twisted. I remember this, she whispered. It's the same letter that brought me west. Garrett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He wrote it under a false name. Said he'd meet you, marry you, give you a future. Then he skipped out, left you to face the storm. Julia felt heat rise behind her eyes. She fought it. She had cried enough for one lifetime. So, she said slowly, he's the one who... Garrett nodded once. He seduced you, lied, left, and he did it more than once. You ain't the first, maybe not the last. She folded the letter with trembling hands and placed it gently on the ground, like it might burn if she held it too long. Why tell me now? She asked. Because the last time I saw him, he was bragging in a saloon up in Red Horse Ridge about how easy it was to play at love. That's when I found out. I've been trailing him since, trying to undo what damage I can. Julia stared into the dark woods beyond the fire, her voice barely more than a whisper. You're chasing ghosts, Garrett. He tossed a twig into the flames. Yeah, well, ghosts don't die easy out here. Silence again. But this time, it felt like something cracked. Not broken, just cracked, like the first thaw in early spring. Julia shifted slightly. So what's your plan now? Ride off into the night after some outlaw brother and leave me at the next post station? Garrett met her gaze, unwavering. That what you want? No, she admitted, but I'm not looking to be saved. Not again. Good, he said. I'm tired of Savon. Thought, maybe I'd try standing beside someone for once. The words were simple, but they struck deeper than he probably knew. Julia didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, she set down the cup and leaned forward, arms resting on her knees. I came out west thinking a man would fix what was wrong, she said. My father always said the frontier could scrub a name clean. Turns out, it just makes the stains more visible. Garrett exhaled a quiet laugh. Yeah, the land's got a funny way of showing a person who they really are. What about you? She asked. Who are you out here? He looked away, expression hard. Someone trying not to be the same man who looked the other way too many times. She nodded once, understanding more than she wanted to. A coyote howled in the distance. The fire hissed softly as a log split down the center, flames licking higher. Julia pulled her shawl tighter. We riding north tomorrow? If you're willing. I want to see him, she said. Thomas. I want him to look me in the eye. Garrett's jaw worked. He nodded. We'll ride at first light. They didn't say good night. Just let the fire die slow. The next morning, the frost was thick and the saddle leather stiff. Julia's hands trembled as she mounted, but she didn't complain. Garrett rode a step ahead, but checked back often. As they crested the first ridge, she turned once to look back at the town now barely visible in the distance, the place where her name had been torn down. Then she faced forward again, toward the place where she might take it back. For a while, they rode in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything unspoken, ashes in her heart, dust on his boots, and two truths riding together through a land that had tried to bury them both. The trail north was no gentle ride. It wound through jagged canyons and dead forests scorched black by wildfires long forgotten. The trees stood like charred bones, silent witnesses to all that had burned and never healed. Just like her, Julia thought. Just like him. Garrett rode ahead, shoulders rigid beneath his coat, eyes sweeping the ridgelines. His horse moved like it had memorized the terrain. Sure, quiet, deliberate. Julia followed close, her fingers white-knuckled on the reins, body still learning the rhythm of a saddle that bruised more than it comforted. They hadn't spoken much since breaking camp. There was too much weight in the cold air, too many thoughts clawing for room. But silence, she'd learned, wasn't always empty. Sometimes it was the only language grief understood. Trail splits up ahead. Garrett said finally, reining in, His voice was gravel and wind. Red Horse Ridge is west, but if we want to make better time, we cut through Fire Trail. Julia squinted into the distance. Fire Trail. It earned the name. Landslides, cougars, bandits. But it'll shave a day. Maybe two. Sounds like the scenic route, she muttered. Garrett cracked the faintest smile. Ain't life just that? They turned west, down a narrow trail lined with broken stone and burnt shrubs. As they descended into the valley, the temperature dropped. Julia felt it in her bones, cold like the kind that steals into the chest and stays. Her breath came shallow. Her hands stiffened around the reins. They crossed a narrow riverbed, mostly dry now. On the far side, they passed an old sign half fallen and faded. Entering Fire Trail. Proceed at your own risk. Julia raised an eyebrow. Comforting. They pressed on. By dusk, the landscape turned ghostly. Ash drifted through the air like forgotten snow. A rock slide had taken out most of the path, forcing them to lead their horses by hand. Garrett went first, boots crunching over loose stone, jaw clenched. Julia followed with trembling legs and sweat trickling down her spine, despite the cold. Suddenly, Garrett froze, hand to his holster. "Don't move," he said. She obeyed, heart pounding. "What is it?" He gestured toward the rocks. "See that?" Julia squinted. There, half buried in the slope, was a rusted tin can wired to a trip cord. Primitive, but deadly. A trap. She swallowed. Garrett crouched and disarmed it in silence. When he stood, he didn't meet her eyes. "Bandits know travelers come this way in desperation," he said. "And desperate folks make easy targets." They moved quickly after that, adrenaline sharpening every step. By nightfall, they found a clearing sheltered by red rock and brush. Garrett made a fire, while Julia hobbled to sit on a flat stone. Her legs ached. Her back screamed. And still, she kept her jaw set. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I've had worse days." "Doesn't make this one better." "No," she said, looking into the flames. "But it makes me meaner." He sat across from her. "That ain't a bad thing." The fire danced between them. Shadows moved across his face, softening the scar on his jaw, darkening the sorrow in his eyes. "You always hunt him?" she asked. "Not always." "So why now?" Garrett exhaled through his nose. "Because it was easier before. Chasing men, I didn't know. Men who deserved ropes or bullets. But Thomas, he's different. He's your brother." He nodded. "Blood don't make a man worth defending, but it does make him hard to face." Julia leaned forward. "Do you plan to kill him?" The question lingered like smoke. "I plan to make him answer," Garrett said. "What happens have to depend on him." They sat in silence again, until Julia whispered, "I want to be there when you find him." Garrett studied her. "You sure?" "I didn't ride all this way to hide behind a tree." A flicker of respect passed across his face. "All right then." The fire burned low. They slept in shifts. When morning came, it brought snow flurries and a trail slick with ice. They rode carefully, horses picking through uneven ground. By mid-afternoon, hoof prints appeared in the trail, fresh, headed in the same direction. Garrett dismounted and crouched to study them. "3 riders," he murmured, moving fast. "Could be him." He nodded. "Could be." The trail narrowed again, squeezed between 2 sheer cliffs. It smelled of smoke and powder. That's when the first shot rang out. Garrett yanked Julia down just as a bullet tore past her shoulder and sparked against stone. She hit the dirt hard, her hat tumbling into the dust. Garrett was already on one knee, revolver drawn, scanning the rocks. "They've got the high ground," he hissed. "Stay low." Another shot cracked, then a third. Gunpowder stung her nose. She crawled behind a boulder, heart hammering. Her fingers found the pistol Garrett had given her 2 nights ago. She hadn't fired it yet. She hadn't meant to. Garrett moved fast, rolling between cover, firing up at the ridge. One of the attackers cried out. A thud followed. Then silence. Then movement to Julia's left. A bandit slid down the slope, rifle drawn, face covered in a filthy red scarf. Julia didn't think. She stood, raised the pistol, and fired. The shot rang sharp through the canyon. The man staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Garrett fired once more and dropped him flat. Breathless, Julia stared at her trembling hand. Smoke curled from the barrel. "You all right?" Garrett called. She nodded slowly. "I think I hit him." "You did." Garrett approached her, brushing dust from her sleeve. "You just saved both of us." "I didn't aim," she admitted. "I just pulled." "Next time, aim, but you did good." She lowered the gun, staring at the man she'd shot. He groaned but lived. Garrett took his knife, cut the man's scarf, and pulled it back. His face was young. Too young, maybe 20, eyes full of panic. Not hardened like the men she'd seen in town. "He's no outlaw," she said. "No," Garrett agreed, "but he's desperate." Garrett bound the man's hands and left him near the fire with a warning. "Try to follow us, and I'll bury you this time." As the sun fell behind the cliffs, they rode on. The trail widened into a dusty pass, and at its edge stood the low-slung silhouette of Red Horse Ridge, a ramshackle mining town built on broken dreams and whiskey. Julia's stomach twisted. Garrett pointed to the far end of the settlement. "That saloon, the Silver Veil. That's where he was seen last." She clenched the reins tighter. "Time to see if the devil still wears your brother's face." Garrett nodded. "And if he remembers the name he ruined." The horses moved forward. The town loomed ahead. And somewhere inside, Truth waited, smoking, grinning, and just arrogant enough to believe his past wouldn't catch him. But it had. The Silver Veil Saloon was half shadow, half whiskey vapor. Its walls leaned like they'd grown weary of standing, and inside, the kind of men who thrive in decay nursed drinks like secrets. A piano played without conviction, its keys half dead, and laughter clung to the air with the weight of old smoke. Garrett stood just inside the swinging doors, hat low, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Julia stepped in beside him, boots dusted, braid loose over one shoulder, her belly pronounced beneath her coat. Proud now, not a mark of shame, but of endurance. The noise dulled as the saloon took notice. Even cowards could sense a reckoning. And there he was, Thomas Wade, at the far table, feet kicked up, grinning through a half-drunk bottle. He wore a fine vest over a filthy shirt and arrogance like a second skin. When he saw Garrett, his smile faltered. When he saw Julia, it dropped completely. "Well," he drawled, pushing up to stand, "ain't this a surprise?" Garrett didn't blink. "You look older. You look angry." "I am." Thomas's gaze flicked to Julia. "And what's she doing here?" Julia stepped forward before Garrett could answer. "I came to give you the courtesy of seeing the consequences you left behind." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That child ain't mine. You can't prove a thing." Julia pulled something from her coat, crumpled paper, smoothed by countless readings. "You remember this letter? You wrote it under a fake name. You lured me west with it. Promised a future. Promised marriage. You never showed up, but I brought your lies with me." She tossed it on the table like a poker chip. Thomas looked at it, jaw twitching. "Don't mean I touched you." Julia's voice didn't waver. "You didn't just touch me. You broke something. And you left me to pick up the pieces with people who spit on my name and call me sinner, while you drink in a saloon pretending none of it ever happened." A few men nearby shifted uncomfortably. The piano stopped. Garrett stepped forward. "I ain't here to kill you, Thomas. I should, but I want the town to know. I want the truth to walk louder than your lies ever did." Thomas looked around, trying to summon bravado, but found only silence and staring eyes. "Fine," he said, voice flat. "I seduced her, told her we'd marry. Then I changed my mind. That what you want?" Julia stared at him. "No. What I want is never to see your face again." Garrett grabbed his brother's collar and slammed him back into his chair. "You ever come near her again," he said low, "and I'll stop aiming for your pride and go straight for your spine." Thomas tried to laugh, but his eyes betrayed him. Garrett stepped back. Julia turned and walked out. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow began to fall, soft flakes settling into the dirt like forgiveness. They didn't speak until they reached the horses. Garrett looked at her. I figured you'd want him to suffer more. He will, she said. Men like him always end up alone. They build a coffin out of their own lies. Garrett nodded. So what now? Julia adjusted her saddlebag, brushed snow from her shoulders. You still offering company on the road ahead? Wasn't just offering. I meant it. She paused. I don't need saving, Garrett. I know. I'm not weak. I've seen you fire a gun. I never thought that. She looked up at him, eyes steady. But I wouldn't mind having someone who walks beside me. Not ahead, not behind. Garrett smiled, slow and true. Then I reckon it's time I shave. They rode back to the settlement 2 towns south, the place where her shame had once hung from every doorframe like a noose. But something had shifted. She walked taller. Garrett stood straighter, and the gossip that once clung to her name like a stain now dried up like a puddle in the sun. She didn't ask for permission. She walked into the chapel one morning and told the pastor, "We'll marry today, if he's willing." Garrett grinned. "Reckon I am." The wedding was quiet. No audience but wind and trees, and a single old woman who watched from the fence post with eyes soft as sorrow. Julia wore the same yellow gingham dress, lay out now at the seams, clean and sun-dried, but still bearing the faint memory of the day it all fell apart. She didn't hide the bump. She didn't hide her past. And when Garrett took her hand, he didn't do it like he was claiming something. He did it like he was returning home. The pastor's words were brief. Julia's were not. "I don't believe in fairy tales," she said, "but I believe in grit. I believe in people who show up when it's hard. And I believe that truth, told at the right time, can change everything." Garrett's hand tightened around hers. "I'm not perfect," he said, "but I'll be damned if I ever leave you behind." When they kissed, it wasn't soft or delicate. It was hard-won, like everything else in their lives. A promise not of ease, but of loyalty. After the ceremony, no one threw flowers. No bells rang. But a few neighbors nodded as they passed. And for the first time, Julia didn't feel like a scandal. She felt like a woman with her name restored. Weeks passed. The seasons began to turn. The baby grew, kicking strong beneath her ribs. Garrett built a small cabin near the ridge. It wasn't much, a single room, a stove, 2 chairs, but it was theirs. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains in blood and gold, Julia stood at the porch railing, one hand on her belly, the other resting on Garrett's. "This ain't the life I expected," she murmured. He looked down at her. "It's better." She smiled. "You think folks will remember?" "Maybe, but maybe not." He nodded. "That's all right, long as we remember." And they did. Because out there, where the dust settles hard and forgiveness is earned, there are stories carved in silence, in gunfire, in vows whispered at the edge of nowhere. This was one of them. Not about a bride in white, but a woman in yellow. Not about a man who saved her, but one who stood beside her when the rest turned away. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, the West gives second chances, not wrapped in ribbon, but built in fire. And sometimes that's better.